Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Words and Music 2020. We've made it, y'all. We're in the home stretch. So today we are paying tribute to New Orleans' own Tom Dent. Tom Dent's writing, as you know, has been the focus of One Book, One New Orleans, year-long citywide reading and literacy initiatives. We chose the Tom Dent Reader, New Orleans Griot, the Tom Dent Reader, edited by Kalamu Ya Salam, as our selection for this year. And we've been, throughout this year, focused on getting his work into prisons, into adult education classes, into juvenile detention centers, and making sure his work is being taught and read, and hosting community programming that brings everyone together around Tom Dent's work. So it felt only appropriate that we close out with a day of Dent. So we have 4 events, and each focuses on a different sort of facet of Tom Dent's life. We're starting out this morning with Affirming Voices, Howard University graduates on Black intellectualism as resistance. That not only pays tribute to Tom Dent, the activist, but also Tom Dent as the son of an HBCU president, and also as an HBCU graduate himself. Then we're moving on to The Power of Jazz and Place in Tom Dent Poetry, a workshop with Sadiyah Jackson, which tributes Tom Dent as a poet. His poetry is incredible. Pick up this book and read it just for the poetry section. And then we're moving on to Tom Dent, the playwright, with No Dream Deferred Theater Company staging Ritual Murder, his one-act play that resonates as deeply in 2020 as it did when it was first written about 50 years ago. And then we're ending with Tom Dent, the man, Tom Dent's family and friends sitting down together and sharing their memories of this powerhouse giant that they knew on a very different level than we as readers know him. So don't forget to support us, drop those donations, and also the one thing that's kind of missing is you all watching at home. So if you're watching, don't forget to drop a comment in the comments section on Facebook and YouTube. Tell us where you're watching from, share the love with our panelists throughout the day, and really let us know that you're here and you're watching. So without further ado, I am going to bring on our curator for Affirming Voices, Howard University graduates on Black intellectualism as resistance. This session is the brainchild of Carmen Wong, who has an MFA from the University of New Orleans. Her poems are featured or forthcoming by Antenna, Ellipsis, The Quarry, and Xavier Review. She was awarded the 2020 Pet Project grant from Jeremy O. Harris and the Bushwick Star, as well as honorable mention for the 2020 Andrea Saunders Garrity Academy of Poets at UNO. She was also awarded a Furious Flower Summer Legacy Fellowship and the National ACLU Summer Advocacy Fellowship, among many others. I had the pleasure of watching Carmen a few months ago teach a playwriting workshop to young people. And guys, when I tell you, remember the name Carmen Wong because she's going to set the literary world on fire in the best way. Mark my words, you heard it here first. Without further ado, Carmen Wong.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me now. I was saying thank you, Megan, for that lovely introduction. I was backstage just giggling. That made me really happy. So thank you so much for that. I want to welcome everyone to Words and Music 2020. Today's conversation, Affirming Voices, a conversation with Howard University graduates on Black intellectualism as resistance. So I have to say, when I moved to New Orleans in 2018, Words and Music was a way for me to connect with brilliant writers, brilliant Black writers, artists, and organizers out here in the community. So I'm thankful to be curating this conversation now, but I could not do this alone. So I would like to welcome here with me my sister circle, my friends, brilliant and talented women that I know. I'm going to read their bios right now for you as we welcome them aboard. Diallo is a 2019 alumna of Howard University, where she earned 2 bachelor's degrees in political science and economics. She is a first-generation American whose family originates from Guinea, West Africa. For as long as I have known her, she has held a passion for traveling and advocating for human rights across the globe. Together, we are the founders of Carmen and I's prom giveaway and fundraiser. I'd also like to welcome Sadiyah Malcolm. She is a sociology scholar and PhD candidate at the University of Michigan and a proud Philly native. She is a 2018 graduate of Howard University, where she earned her undergraduate degrees in both sociology and Afro-American studies. She is the founder of SELO, which stands for Sisters Elevating Learning and Healing, which was founded in 2018 with a foremost commitment to empowering girls through community building, literacy, and the arts. And fun fact, Sadia and I attended Howard together, but we didn't actually meet until we were studying abroad in London. I have to throw that out there. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Tierra Jackson. She is a senior analyst on Comcast, NBC Universal's Workforce, DEI team. She is a proud graduate of Howard University class of 2018, much like myself, and she earned a BBA in finance. She is the dancer of the group, so I have to also throw that out there, and the founder of 518 Rebirth, a platform that helps millennials identify their passions and encourage them to walk boldly in their God-given purpose, as well as the host of #Unwind Wednesdays on Instagram Live. So please make sure that you're checking these ladies out on Instagram and on Facebook. And if you like something you hear, like Megan said, feel free to send your comments and engage with us directly. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to get the conversation started. But before we do, I have to ask, how are you doing? Based on your bios, I know that you're all busy. So how are you holding up during COVID?
Well,
COVID crickets every time you ask that question.
COVID is very interesting. I'm currently in California right now, and everything has been placed back on lockdown. And I hate to get emotional, but I really always think about homeless people who have to deal with this stuff during this time. And so while I can say, it's hard and it's a struggle, I'm like, these people are outside in the cold. And so, yeah, it's tough to think about for myself and for all the surrounding communities.
Yeah, I definitely think these are unprecedented times, and it's difficult to place, right? Because the only reference I have for 2020 is like an apocalyptic movie or something. And at the same time, you see the health disparities and things that are showing up that are very, basically representative of our whole history, in this United States. So it's really difficult, and my prayers and thoughts go out to those who are most vulnerable and susceptible, those people who are struggling right now. And that's COVID.
I agree. And I would also say it's a very interesting time for us to now be working from home, living from home. And I would say love on your loved ones as much as possible, because this year has been a crazy roller coaster and we still have a few more months to go during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I was going to say, especially as I was listening to you talk, Tierra, is the way that I think with COVID-19 and everything that has unfolded since we've been quarantining, I think that it has definitely amplified a lot of what we know in this room, right? In terms of the disproportionate rates that people of color, that Black people are actually not being taken care of, the ways that medically we aren't treated with the same type of equity and fairness. I think that it's really just amplifying what exactly we need to get done. And I'm trying to remain hopeful. That is the only way that I think that I can sustain myself right now. And I think that most people may agree with me, but I think that it's important to try to find some hope throughout all of this. And so I definitely wanted to thank you guys again for joining me Tierra mentioned it, but we are located all across the country right now, right? So you could have been doing anything. I'm not sure what time zone you are right now, but you have decided to join in this conversation, and I want to thank you guys so much. Sadiyah kind of mentioned this, which leads me to asking about how has it been like trying to be productive? What does productivity look like? How has it impacted your studying or your work habits?
Productivity is something I struggle with daily. And I say that because I think a lot of people would say, because we're at home, because we're in COVID, you need to be doing something. You need to be working. And part of me definitely agrees with that. But another side is like, sometimes you need to just take some time to self-reflect and rest. And I think that you can't be productive if you don't do that. And so productivity has been a struggle because I'm trying to balance like making sure I maintain a level of like introspection as well as making sure I'm doing the things that I should be doing during this time. So it's a daily struggle.
For me, as a PhD student, the journey is long, very long, and productivity is measured by a lot of different metrics, but it's difficult for me because every day is a constant threat that is different than the other threats that we had already been juggling in the first place. And a lot of people, we don't have access to our communities the same ways that we would, right? For many of us, we look forward to the holiday season and, being around family, but this year has to look a little different. What it means to love your loved ones looks a little different. And for me, that affects my work. My work centers Black girls, right, who are vulnerable to a lot of different forms of violence. And COVID is another level of, kind of heightening that violence that they're susceptible to, because I think about girls who don't have access to schools or meals, every day in the same ways that they might have otherwise. People who are in situations where abuse, right, is magnified because they're, at home and don't have access to, safety, where people are not able to see them and check on them and make sure that they're okay. So for me, there's a lot of feelings around juggling how to remain engaged in the communities that I care about during this era. And it does affect my work, right? And so working through that for me looks like being in community with you all here, making phone calls and, seeing if people are okay. And so I have to look at productivity very differently in this moment.
I echo both what Sadiyah and Tierra said, but also I think for me personally, it's been an uphill battle. I lost my job a little while ago. So for me, I've been trying to see, okay, do I stay too busy or do I find this balance of being okay with just being still? And that's been the hardest for me, going from college, working full time, and now just having to have to be still. I've been trying to figure out what does that look like. And every day is a little different. Some days, I'm not going to lie, I spend the day watching Netflix all day. And then other days I'm like, you know what? I got a checklist of things I need to do because I'm also trying to get to that next level of my education. So I think every day is different. And we have to learn to be like, have grace with ourselves and be at peace with knowing that, okay, I'm here at this very moment, but this is not going to be, it's not going to be the same in like 2 to 3 months from now. So it's been an uphill battle. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I definitely agree. First, I want to say thank you everyone for tuning in. We see your comments. But I agree with the both of you. Well, all three of you actually, but specifically as it deals with just trying to figure out what boundaries look like. I know for me, I am working from home and doing classes from home as well. Well, technically I'm wrapping up. But in the process of doing that, it was very difficult, I think, for me to try to lay boundaries and like, okay, what should I be doing during these various hours of my day? And when does that stop, right? Sometimes you can like walk out of an office, which I was able to do before, and just like not check your email. But now it seems like I'm in bed checking my email for different emails and, my school email, my work email, and various other things that I'm working on. And I think that, I always talk about sometimes my work habit stems from this traumatic fear, right? Like coming to this country as a first generation college student, which I'm so proud of, and I know that that's a privilege to be. But I think, you know, coming from the area that I grew up in, which was Southside Jamaica, Queens, I always feel like I had to do something to get out of there, right? And then once I went to Howard, I was able to do that. I felt like I was able to get out of there. And then now it's like, well, what keeps me out, you know? But in what ways do I willingly choose to re-enter, right, those spaces as the person I am today, right, which is someone who cares about community, someone who is very into doing community work for communities that have support me specifically. So that's something that has been a challenge because sometimes I feel like I do overwork myself, which maybe you guys can attest to. But I think I could not imagine doing this process of grad school, like starting it right now, right? I think that I would have a completely different experience if that were the case. I see Sadiyah nodding her head.
I love, Carm, that you talked about boundaries with work, because one thing COVID really made me realize is how intentional I need to set boundaries with people. Because similar to what you were saying in terms of like you're constantly checking your email, and us being at home, people just think that we're free. And so we'll constantly get calls from friends and family and all these things. And just being the type of people that we are, we'll oftentimes take on their problems and their issues. So now that also affects our productivity. And so setting boundaries within work has also, or you setting boundaries with the work, I had to set boundaries with people, and that's also.
I was actually saying that this morning before this call, so that's crazy. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we checked in, that especially those who are tuning in, they know that we are no different. We are here because we believe that these conversations spark some truth, that these conversations open the door to more discourse around what's really going on, that just being scholars and being Black women who were able to navigate a space, whether it's Howard University or our own professional careers, that we don't have it all together all the time, right? So I just wanted to make sure that we checked in, and I'm so fortunate that you guys are here, and I keep saying that because I really do mean that. And so I'll just introduce a little bit of what we're getting into today. So I shared this with each of you already, but if you're tuning in, I want to let you know that I was asked specifically to create this presentation for the Words and Music Festival in the revolutionary spirit of Tom Dent as a result of something that I publicly wrote. And a short excerpt of what that was is, quote, "My experience at a predominantly white institution for graduate school after graduating from a distinguished historically Black college and university has taught me about the function of racism within the academy and its infiltration in classroom learning. It has shown me how supportive communities are essential and that being a Black intellectual is an act of resistance." So I wanted this to be an extremely open and candid conversation on our identities as Black students. I knew that I could not host something like this by myself, and that I wanted it to be in community and in fellowship with people that I trust, because these conversations are very difficult, but I think that they're very necessary. So I would like for us to talk a little bit about navigating these spaces, whether it's in academia, because we all have that shared experiences, or in our individual professions. Especially because I know with Kamala Harris, that representation in the White House, and then even with Between the Worlds and Me premiering on HBO, you know, we're proud to throw that HU title on, rightfully so. But I do have to, you know, let everyone know that this is definitely an HBCU all hype zone. We love all HBCUs. We have studied it. We understand and we recognize why they are needed around this country and within various communities. So, you know, we keep saying Howard, but all love to all HBCUs for real. So I'd like for us to just get this conversation started and talk a little bit about our identities being the front and center, right? A lot of the times of our experiences in college and then beyond.
Carmen, can we get an HU real quick? Can we do that?
Yeah. Okay. Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. You
know.
You know? I like that. All I'm glad Sadiyah told us that. We could not have started this conversation without that. But I definitely, that made me think a lot about the space that is Howard University, right? And I came out of a Black community, right? My family Black. I grew up in a Black neighborhood, and then I went to a Black high school. I went to a Black college, and all that was by choice. And I entered Howard with an understanding of what Howard was, right? I read a lot of stories, interviews about a lot of artists, former students who talk about not really understanding what the Mecca was and the ways that it could transform them until after. I definitely think that I grew, or I know that I grew a lot. And I do think that over time, I recognized how much I grew and how much that was in response to a space that cultivated me. But I knew that I was on a mission to attend Howard University, primarily because of the Black writers that came out of that institution, whether that was through their education or whether that was the work that they did in the surrounding community. And so that was my intent with attending a space like Howard. I also knew that in the spirit of community activism, it was someplace that I wanted to see myself in. So I like to talk a little bit about how Howard has shaped the ways that you exert your and insert your Black identity, whether it's in the space that you are in now or while you were there.
Well, I'll start with this. Howard wasn't my first choice. And so just a little bit of background on me. I grew up in Connecticut. Similar to, or not really similar, but I know you oftentimes hear stories of people who grow up in these different classrooms and don't have any information of like their Black history. That was me. And so I didn't really understand like what it truly meant to be Black and to be a Black woman until I went to Howard. And the reason why I went to Howard was because my mom couldn't afford to send me off to college, and Howard's the only one who gave me money to go. And so that's where you're going. But how has that shaped my identity? When I tell you, I don't even know how to put it into words, because I think, and honestly, none of us would be where we are today if it weren't for Howard University. And just growing up or just being in these different corporate spaces as a Black woman, oftentimes as the only Black person, is a challenge. It's a challenge, but one thing, and I think Carmen, you helped me with this, is oftentimes you have to just be comfortable with making people uncomfortable, and learning not to shrink yourself in moments or in areas that you may feel like you want to shrink because you don't want to be your authentic self because you don't want to offend someone else. No, I'm not going to do that. And so I think how has Howard shaped me? It's allowed me to be comfortable with who I am, and allowed me to take up space in rooms that I belong in.
I think my HU, I love my HU. I just have to say, I mean, I think about the very nature of like what became possible in my mind when I got to Howard. So I'm a first generation college student, but also a first generation American. And so what that means for me is a completely different, world, no pun intended, because TV shows like A Different World and, all of those TV shows that we used to watch in the 90s and seeing them in the sweatshirts. I used to love, what is the Kid and Play movie? Not School Days. One of those movies, House Party. Yeah. I loved House Party. And I remember when I came across House Party, I used to watch them over and over and over again. And it wasn't necessarily the party aspect that was important to me, but it was this Black community that was a part of every aspect of everybody's lives. I was like, dang, like this reminds me of Philly, right? Because that was my reference, at some point. And Howard, for me, was the space that awakened me to myself. I think a lot of times we see people like repping, as alumni of different spaces, high school, colleges, grad school, whatever. And a lot of times it's ornamental, right? But for me, I mean, when I put on a Howard hoodie and I'm in Paris on a train, I didn't even think about it because I love Howard. I got about 5 Howard hoodies, right? And somebody passes by, they're like, ain't you? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in Paris. Those moments for me remind me of how important Howard is beyond the optics, right? those connections where I'm working with a judge, you know, in Philadelphia, and years later she's calling and checking on me. She went to Howard. She's interested in where my journey goes. Her daughter just went to Howard. What does it mean for people to entrust the people that they love to people in this HU network, right? And for me, that has been a part of what grounds me in my work, right? For me, Howard was more than an intellectual experience or an experience with, you know, socially, right, as an adolescent, but it continues to guide the way that I do my work. It guides the heart of my work. I sat in classrooms with the intellectuals who I see them as intellectual paragons. I sat on floors in cramped classrooms, right? We stood up in financial aid lines for hours with people who are now on TV. So when I see Kamala Harris, politics aside, because at Howard, we also parse those nuances, right? I know that it's real when people are like, oh, HU, and, you know, we love to see it. And, you know, all of these things, that love feels real. And during lockdown and COVID, for me, it reminds me of what it meant to awaken my young mind to what it meant to be an intellectual in a space like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Howard was a blessing. Like I'm just like Tierra. Howard was not my first choice, but like my first time riding down Georgia Avenue, I was like, yeah, I'm meant to be here. Like this is where I need to be. And then once I got into Howard and I started doing different organizations, but also just when I started to study abroad too, it woken in me like what I already knew I wanted to be, which was somewhere in human rights, making sure that I'm advocating for people around the world. And even now that I'm back home in Atlanta, it's that Howard person in me, that person that like, I always was in Black spaces, but then when I went to Howard, it was very different to know that like, oh, okay, you're sitting in classes with Black people with like, that are in like the elite class, but also you're sitting in classes with people that are like their parents are mayors and governors, which to me was like new to me. I grew up in Atlanta where I'm like, all of us are the same. You think like, oh, you got some type of money, but then you get to Howard and it's like, oh no, this is real money. This is different. And just like Sadiyah, I'm like, I'm first generation as well, and first generation and first generation American as well. So for me, it was a very different ball game getting to Howard and then maneuvering through Howard. And for me, what I've always wanted to do was walk in my community and make sure that I'm an inspiration for others. And since I went to Howard, we have more Fulani people go to Howard as well. And I love that. And even now that I'm back in my community here in Georgia, I'm making sure that I'm advocating for my community in different spaces. And even when I was in corporate America, just like Tierra, it was making sure that I continue to open that door for other people that look just like me and that are like me in those spaces. So Howard made sure it allowed you to get comfortable and understanding you're not going to be comfortable in all the spaces that you're going to be in. But what does that now look like now that you're in that space? Now it's your job to continue opening that doors for people that look just like you in those spaces. And so I'm forever grateful for Howard, for the people I met. Like, look at this beautiful panel. Like, y'all are some of my closest friends and like people that I maneuvered the world with and that I will maneuver the world for generations to come. So I'm super excited. Howard is a blessing. And don't get it wrong, Howard is also... anyone that graduates from Howard, you'd be like, oh yeah, I earned this degree. And it's for a reason. But I'm forever grateful for my HBCU.
Definitely. I think it's this idea. I think I saw someone, I'll probably write this on Facebook last night or something. And again, it's like looking at that lineage, right? The ways that the elders are talking to us still. But someone was saying Howard is a sacred space. Right. And I think that that's part of it, right? That it takes a certain type of tenacity to even be there, a certain type of want to even be there. I did not originally get accepted to Howard University. My story is very long.
I love this story. You have to tell it. I love this story.
Well, I was adamant. I was going to Howard, right? I wanted to be around Black excellence. I had been around Black folks my whole life, right? And I think coming out of the communities in which I did, I was fortunate that I went to a school like Boys and Girls High School, which has changed severely since, right? But where I got into an early scholars program, and through that program, I met educators who pushed me and really made me believe that I could go to college. And then I became a first generation college student years later. But also, you know, to the point that I and Sadiyah made, I don't really consider myself a first generation American, right? Even though I grew up in America. I always say Guyanese born poet, playwright. And one of the things that I think Howard does is it allows you to explore that hyphenation, right? What exactly it means to have this transnational identity, right? Sadiyah talks about that a lot, and we've had many conversations about that. So I just knew I wanted to be in a place that was around people that looked like me, but also because I was in a program with educators that made me believe in something, I started to believe that there were Black folks out there that actually wanted an education, right? I was in a community where we didn't see that happening, right? I was in a school where, if not for my program, there wasn't a high graduation rate, right? And when I started to see that I was capable of graduating, that I was capable of going to college, I started to realize, well, this is probably happening around the world. And so I wanted to be in a space where there were other people like that, right? I do think that there is a large amount of the student population that are legacy students, right, whose parents went to college. But there is still a vast number of students who was very much like me, right, who entered this space because they knew of, even if it was just dreamt of and envisioned, but they knew of this idea of Black excellence, right? And so that's something that I was searching after. And luckily, I got into the Sean Carter Foundation scholarship bus tour. And we traveled on a bus to HBCUs from like all the way down to, I think it was like North Carolina. We did like the East Coast. And we would stop even at much smaller institutions, right? And I remember going to Howard as we made our way up. And I didn't know at the time that that was the admissions officer for New York applicants. Who was speaking directly to us, and he was just telling us all these great things about HU, and like, you know, we have scholars who maintain high GPAs, but also that's not just what we're looking for. We're looking for students who are invested in their community, looking for students who like X, Y, and Z. And I just remember, you know, it was a part of me that was so upset because this is like right after they rejected me, right? And I went up to him right after and I said, you know, something along the lines of, you just named all of these things that you would want in a prospective student, and I am all of these things. And then he told me to follow up with him, and I did. I definitely did, and I did that for a few weeks until I think right around my birthday. I got the good news that I had got accepted. And then from there, it was like, well, in order for me to attend, I needed some financial aid. And so I went sending emails to everyone, trying to figure out how to fund my experience there. Because my parents did not attend college, they did not really know what to make of all of this. But I was determined. I was on a mission. I never felt alone. Because I had educators, I had staff in my high school, I had a lot of people behind the scenes who said this is possible, right? Who was willing to help me look for opportunities. And so I'm so thankful for them. To this day, I still call them. I still thank them because I don't think I could be sitting here curating this panel with other Howard University graduates if not for them, right? So when I look at my story, I think for me, it definitely precedes Howard. But I also think Howard plays a magnificent part of who I am today, in the ways that I think I'm able to articulate this idea, this feeling that I have towards making sure that we insert our Black identities and that we don't apologize for it, that we're not afraid to talk about it. And so that brings me also to the point that I made earlier in talking about her Fulani community and the ways that she's been able to open doors and to tread pathways for them, right? So I want to ask, like, how do we prepare Black students to navigate these settings, whether it's academically or just in the workforce after college? How do we prepare them to say, hey, I want to go to an HBC, right? I think with the climate of everything that's going on politically in this country, we've seen that kind of shift, and more students may be becoming more interested. And I think socially, right? I think in a way that it's become, quote unquote, more socially acceptable, but a lot of us knew what it was before then. Or how do we even prepare Black students to navigate predominantly white institutions, right? Because Some of us have done it in our early childhood, and some of us are doing it now.
I wanted to say, I think, I was, as you see me with my notebook, I feel like I'm back at Howard. I'll be like, listen, let me just try to write this stuff down and reflect. But as I was thinking about this idea of intellectualism as resistance, I want that to be palatable and understood for students who are coming up behind us. And it's important because my thesis that I wrote in undergrad was called Black on Black Learning Towards a Self-Authenticating Narrative of College Selection. And it talked about these waves where things happen politically and people kind of run to HBCUs as a space of refuge, not only to get an education, but also just to find community, right? I thought about when the Mike Brown verdict came back and we just walked down U Street. It wasn't anything organized. It was people, our professors crying with us, pouring libations. And I wanted to say, like, it's difficult because we think about Black intellectualism from a space of like public intellectualism when it comes to the social media era. But what Howard taught me was that it's not so much that Black intellectualism is resistance as much as it is the resistance that we are doing in these spaces is tied to a genealogy of Black liberation. And it is because we're seeking to do the very thing that people never expected us to do: live, learn, all of those things, enjoy certain rights and privileges. But I think that I want students to understand that they are a part of that history and moving that history forward. And what that means is, what does your community look like? What does it need? Why does it need you? What have your eyes been prepared to see and identify in your communities that big organizations might not know of? I think about one young woman in Philadelphia. Her name is Brianna, and she worked for Johnson & Johnson. And when I was running Selah, which I started in 2010, but I started working with even younger girls in 2015, Johnson & Johnson was sending things in, for the girls to talk about. Let's talk about hygiene. But what does it mean for you to be coming from your community, see a need, and prepare yourself to meet that need? That's how I want young people to see themselves as they set themselves up for this intellectual, trajectory. And it speaks to the first generation piece that Megan posted in the comments. I'm not sure if Q&A time will be separate, but really seeing themselves as what we need, right? And so that's what I would say, that positionality first.
Literally, I echo everything Sadiyah said. Every single thing. Like, there's nothing else to say.
I echo it, and I would also add, I think one of the things that's very important for us to do and for us to continue to do is like find ways to give back in the form of mentorship. I think that's really important. Like, I would have never went to Howard if it wasn't for my mentors, and I wouldn't be in the space that I am in now without my mentors. So I think our biggest responsibility is not just position ourselves into like, we go to these HBCUs, we get all these like different accolades, and we think like, oh yeah, our world is set, and we go into corporate America and we start making these big bucks, and we forget where we come from. So I think the biggest part of that is making sure that, yeah, you're doing all of this, but make sure you're bringing people along the way with you as well. Like, whether that's just going back to your local high schools, or whether that's just being part of mentorship programs. Like, I'm part of like 2 or 3, and I have little mentees that I check on, and sometimes they check on me because I need it as well. So I think it's like making sure that whatever space that we go into, one of my favorite quotes is, you always make sure that you have people behind you that you're bringing up, people next to you that you're walking along with in this journey, and people in front of you that are pushing you forward. So I think we can't forget that. And in that way, we need to make sure that we're always part of some type of mentorship, whether we create it by just seeing someone outside and you like, you know what, I like her, like she needs help, I need help, how about we get together, or whether we're actually part of formal programs that are like, there's plenty of programs in DC or in our local areas that we're in that we need to be more part of, especially as those Black intellectuals that's maneuvered a lot of the spaces that people are trying to get to.
Yeah, actually, in my discourse around leadership politics, I always talk about this idea of servant leadership, an idea, like you mentioned, but lifting as you climb, right? Which means that as you are going forward, right, that you're not going forward alone. I think it's also knowing that the presence of the people who walk the space before me is always with me, right? That's something that keeps me going, especially as I think about how exactly I've been able to now successfully graduate, right, from my master's program, which was the first time I had been in a white educational institution, right? And so I say that because I'm thinking of when I first entered grad school, right? And I was reaching out to my former professors at Howard. And one of them specifically, I love her. She taught English there, literature there. And so I studied under her, and she helped me with my applications for grad school. And I really could not be here without her and without people like her. But I remember I was writing my first papers for grad school, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. And I reached out to her and I said, very honest, I need help. What direction should this go in? And she was very honest, very thorough. And she is a Jamaican woman and she was responding to me straight up patois, and one of the things she said at the end of that conversation was that I preferred to be the one to tell you this, right? Before you go out, you submit this paper, and then it's being told the same things from a different angle, different perspective, a different tenor, by a lot of my white instructors, right? And especially when we're engaging, for me, a lot of the academic work that I do looks at Black literature, which means that it looks at Black culture, which means that it looks at Black history. And so being able to be around scholars, right, professionals who understood I had been doing this work for some odd years, and to always receive advice from them in the ways that I can just call them up to this day. And that they're so candid with me, I think that grounds me in support. And so as I was thinking about this panel today, and I like to call it a conversation because I think that what we're doing right now is just having a very loving, very endearing conversation about an institution that has shaped us, but also because we care and we are so compassionate about how to shape the spaces around us, right? And intentional about doing so. So as I put this together, one of the things that I had to think about, and I was like, well, I'm not the only one that's going through this, right? And I wanted to bring this together, is I thought a lot about how it's taking me many years, right? I had to go through Howard. I had to go through that experience, which led me to surviving, right? I like to call it surviving grad school because it was a very difficult journey, and each of you have been with me through this. And I think about students, right, who have yet maybe to go to college, who have yet to enter Howard or a space like Howard, right? We're saying Howard, but there are so many spaces within our communities, right, that foster these kinds of relationships. And that's why I keep saying I've learned that early on, and that's what I've searched after, right? So I'm thinking about students who have yet to maybe enter Howard, enter college, or maybe they are in college, right, but aren't at a place that they feel as nurtured and as supported as the real HU. And so, what do we say to them, right? Like, how is it that we can talk to them about this journey? How is it that we can reinsure, right, that there is a space that is carved out for them, right, with their name written on it, that this is a space where they are valued. Each of you know that I am now lecturing over at Franklin High School in New Orleans. And so one of the things that I am very adamant about, especially with working with young people, young Black students, is making sure that they know that there is a space for them, right? That their identity as a Black student, as a Black scholar, as a Black intellectual is very valid, right? That I make sure every time I enter a conversation with them that they are validated, that they feel validated, even if this is the first time today or the 10th time. Right. So how is it that we can do so just by simply having this kind of conversation? I see a lot of food for thought. You guys are your minds are wondering.
I thought I was going to talk because I thought her thing was unmuted. You have something to say, Guy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think part of I just lost my train of thought.
It's a lot to digest, and that's one of the things I was writing, you know, when I was putting this together and talking to you guys about it, right? That it is a lot to digest, that even having, you know, holding space for this conversation, let alone participating in it, means that it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of encouragement, you know, from each of us to give to each other and pour back into ourselves, right? And give to our communities, the people who are watching, right?
And Carmen, this is work that has been on your heart for a long time because of those very, you know, connections you mentioned. And so I know that you mentioned those, and for the people watching, they're like, oh, you know, that's dope. You know, she had mentors, but Carmen has been actively involved in being part of that chain that links the past to the future. You know, whether it's her and I doing the prom giveaway thing, right? We don't even think about what prom means for students who, you know, might be in need these days, right? Especially, you know, wanting to feel special and all of these things. But Carmen has done workshops, poetry workshops for teenagers, and really like, and those spaces do exactly what I mentioned earlier, making students feel like they are in part of the Mbangi from the very beginning. You are required to share with the collective in order to move us forward. And you're not sharing, or you're not participating in moving us forward, hurts all of us. And us not doing our part in moving you forward hurts all of us. And I just echo that again, like in the work that you and I do, and the work that Tierra also does, and, you know, and the work that I do, we're thinking about how to make students realize and recognize the gravity of their participation in our move towards liberation from the very beginning. And I think that does look like introducing students to Black literacy. I think it does look like introducing students to the range of professional possibilities, intellectual possibilities, creative possibilities. I think it does look like being honest with them, like you said about your mentor earlier and previous professor. What does it mean for us to correct each other when we're wrong? What does it mean for us to sharpen each other so that we go out into the world and show up more prepared? That begins with elementary school, grade school. That begins with high school. That begins with having these conversations about what is the real political significance of the difference between a historically Black university and a historically white university, right? What does that mean for our people? And what does that mean for moving us forward? How do we understand what it might mean for somebody from a background who might not have the resources to pay for college to have to make that decision and that sacrifice? I and I were Gates Millennium Scholars, right? So we could, you know, choose anywhere we got in, but I always talk to students from the place of I understand what you mean by my family might not have it to send me here. So what can my community do? Is there a scholarship at my church for $500? Is there a book scholarship at the YMCA? Does Howard University have an alumni association in this space? Does NCAT, Spellhouse, you know, Clark, whoever, right? Alabama State, where can I go to link me to this community? And I think for us, we have to show up for those youth, right? Knowing that we might be a part of that chain that links them into their next step.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Oh, I see I just unmuted herself.
My train of thought just came back to me, but I completely agree with Sadiyah. I think it starts with us continuously creating those spaces for people to, you know, understand like what more is out there for them so they can be better prepared. So it starts with either us just doing like a prom giveaway or us just doing an Instagram page, but also for people to understand, like one of the things my mentor taught me at an early age was to ask for help. Like people are here as your resource. So don't be scared to be like, hey, I like that you do this. How do you do that? And for us also, when someone asks us for help, to also be available when we can be available. For us to also be like, you know what, this is how you do this. Let's sit down here. Let's talk there. Let's sit down this week. Let's sit down that week and talk. So I think a lot of it stems from us just like understanding, one, when to ask for help, but then two, when ask is help of us, like being able to help them and answer those when we have the space for that.
First of all, beautifully said, both of you all. The only thing I will add is I think we need to cultivate more environments that I don't want to say help people discover their identity, because I don't know if like I don't think I can help you discover your identity. I think that's something that people have to do on a personal level, but cultivating environments that allow people to just be themselves. And similar to what I and CD were saying, like ask those different questions like, hey, this is something I'm interested in, but you know, people haven't seen it done before in my community. And so Really, it's a matter of encouraging people to just be authentically who they are and know that they have the support and backing from us, from the prom giveaway, from people like you, and Sadiyah, who really want them to just reach their full potential.
Yeah, I can't help but think about what Sadiyah mentioned in this work that we're doing, right? In the ways that we see it show up across various mediums. But this work towards liberation, right? How does that show up in our organizational pursuits, in our academic pursuits, in our professional lives? And what are the intersections, right? Which is definitely food for thought. And that is something that I'm always considering. And so I think that it is uneasy, right? Especially when you're young, to be a young Black student, a young Black daughter, a young Black brother, to really think about where exactly we fall into this realm, right? How exactly can we ask for help without seeming too needy, right? That's something I had to learn. I think the best advice I got going into college was closed mouths don't get fed. And so my mouth been open. I've been asking everybody, anytime, especially as I look at, how much my parents wanted to support me, right? Financially, how much they wanted to support me socially, right? Academically, but always didn't have the means to do so, right? And I think for me, personally, it took a lot of understanding to not live with any kind of resentment, right? When you're a young Black student and you don't have the same access to things, you start to be like, what's wrong with me? But I think in my own understanding and acceptance of all of this, it's really come down to realizing, the truth behind all of that, right? Like, what does it mean, right? And how is this still valuable? I think that it's become some of my proudest parts of me, right? To actually speak about, what it's like to come from a household that didn't have quite the same means as a lot of people who attended the same college that we did, right? And to be able to thrive, to be able to hold intellectual conversation, right? Because you could attend whatever university, right? But what exactly you walk away with it is definitely going to be up to what exactly it is that you're looking to walk away with, right? So that's always the case. We are winding down in time, so I do want to ask anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to send your comments in. While they're doing that, I'd like you ladies to close out by saying where people can follow you, whether that's on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever you prefer, if you have a website. If you want to talk a little bit more about your organizations that I briefly introduced. I want to thank you so much for sharing in this space with me. And I look forward to doing this again sometime.
First off, Carm, thank you for having us and thinking of us when, for this conversation. And I hope you plug yourself as well in the end. But for me, you can just follow me on Instagram at I am Miss Jackson. That's MS with a miss. Also follow 518 Rebirth, the organization Carm touched on. I do strategy sessions and they're free 99. So the free 30-minute strategy sessions, because like we said, we're just all trying to support. And so if there's any way that I can do that, that is how,
Yeah, thank you so much for having us in this space. We could talk for a long time, but since we got to wind down, we'll continue this on a podcast. Plug your podcast, Carmen. But I would definitely say you can always reach me on Instagram _namaste_I. I'm always working on projects, have a few more things coming up in the Atlanta area, definitely. So please contact me if you're in the Atlanta area and ever want to do some type of service project. I'm here for that. Also follow me and Carmen at our prom giveaway page. It's CA prom giveaway. We will be continuing next year once we figure out what is going on with COVID. If not prom, then we definitely will be leaning towards scholarships. So please reach out to us if you would like to participate. If you also like mentors, we're here. Please reach out to any of us on this panel. We're a resource for everyone. Please reach out.
And if anybody wants to reach out to me directly, you can email me at sadiyah@umich.edu. That's SADIYAH, like my name on the screen, at umich.edu. You could also follow my intellectual work if you ever want to join or witness workshops at theblackgirlhoodcommons.com. And what else? You can look out for new episodes of my podcast, maybe towards the end of the year. Let's spill the details on Apple, Spotify, and all of those other platforms. And then, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Shameless plug. I have a podcast called What You Read in the Series. It is a literary podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at What You Read in the Series. That's What You Read in, okay? And it actually is a birth child that stemmed from, of course, my appreciation and interest in Black literature and wanting to make sure that we advocate for this idea of Black consciousness. But it actually also emerged after I was featured on Sadiyah's podcast, right? So, you know, it's the way that we grow from each other. And each of them are also featured on various episodes of my podcast as well. So I'm very thankful for that. Also, I have a play that's out right now with Theater Alliance. It is my first commission production at Original Theater, and I'm looking forward to doing great things. You should be able to check out more about it for another showing, because everything is virtual, via my literary page, which is What You Read in the Series. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you everyone for tuning in. As I always tell my students, thank you for your time and your intellect.
Thank you, honey. We love you.
We love all of y'all.
Right. And please go check out their podcast, because they are really good. They're really good.
Start a podcast too?
It's not about me. It's about y'all. Yes, I did. Check out on Spotify, hashtag Unwind Wednesday. We share key lessons about business, life, and faith. Period.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, so when Carmen said that we basically asked her to do this, because I read that thing she posted and I was like, this is the thing. This is the thing Carmen should do at Words and Music. I'm so glad we were right, because that was incredible. And I'm so humbled that you guys brought this to us and let Words and Music be the space for this conversation to happen. Thank you so much. If you guys are tuning in, you will notice it was not behind a paywall, but we would appreciate your support. We're doing this entire 4-day festival on a rolling donation basis. COVID has hit all our wallets hard. So if you can give $1 or 1,000 or anything in between, we will appreciate you. You can do that by clicking the links in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. You can also do that by going to your PayPal and PayPaling wordsandmusicnola@gmail.com. You can do that by going to your phone and texting WAM for Words and Music at 44321. And I was blown away, just like Sadiyah. I was taking notes. And one thing Sadiyah said was the chain that links the past to the future. And the reason I was so excited when I heard her say that is because New Orleans griot, the Tom Dent reader, griot is a West African word that means storyteller, right? And the griot was the one who preserved the cultural memory and made sure it was passed down from one generation to the next. So like the griot was the chain that linked the past to the future. And I thought that was such a beautiful phrase. So I'm really thankful that you spoke that, because it's so much in the vein of what Tom Dent did with his work. And speaking of which, we will be back in 14 minutes with a poetry workshop inspired by Tom Dent and led by Sadiyah Jackson. I will see you guys in just a few. Thank you.